next act in Genesis is the formulation of biology from the planets and stars. And God said, "Let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and fowl that may fly above the earth." And God said, "Let the earth bring forth the living creature after his kind, cattle and creeping thing, and beasts of the earth after his kind." And it was so. And God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our own likeness." So what we see here is, in this verse, all biological diversity on the planet was spoken into existence and therefore must have a relationship with acoustical phenomena if Genesis has any credibility to sciences and academia. If this can be shown to be true, then all DNA must be an informational code from which all incarnate living matter is manifested. 3. Information can then only come from an intelligent mind. Information does not spontaneously create itself. You can't get it from rocks and from plasmas and from elementary particles. Now, you yourself are nothing more. I know you see yourself sitting there, you see me standing here, but when you break you down into your smallest components, you're nothing but energy and 99% space. So you are 1% energy sitting there and 99% space. That energy is then coalesced into elementary particles. Those elementary particles come together to form atoms. Those atoms come together to form molecules. Those molecules come together to form compounds, which we call DNA and all the enzymes. And then it comes together to form organs. All these come together to form organs. All the organs come together to form your body and you. So you are nothing but energy and all these different levels coming together to form human. Okay? This goes for all animals and plant life on the earth. The inverse square law states that any point source which spreads its influence equally in all directions without a limit to its range will obey the inverse square law. Okay, so you start with the point source. That's the source of luminescence. As it spreads outwards, it creates bigger, larger, and larger areas. Okay? It applies to gravity, light, sound, radiation, and electricity. But what about biology and evolution? The 7 mandatory taxonomic classifications are: you start with kingdom, that's the largest. Then you go to phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. And you have subspecies levels too. At the point of species, this is where in Genesis we get the kinds. The species are the kinds mentioned in Genesis that reproduce after their own selves. So, basically, from what we say in biology and evolution, other taxonomic classifications, you have species, alright, equals in Genesis, kinds. Now, you have subspecies and kinds, and they reproduce, according to Genesis, after their own kind. Now, the largest, most diverse group is the kingdom, or literally this could be a whole ecosystem also, but we won't get into that. All biological diversity is the result of the same kind and or prime harmonic. So, also, you can look at kingdom could also, another term of reference, equal kind. And then from the kingdom, you have, after its own kind, all the different levels of taxonomical organization of species. Okay? Now, our kind, as we mentioned in the last section, is the sun and its sound wave. We all vibrate in unison according to the kind of wave that's emitted from the sun. That's your energy. It's in harmony with this energy. Okay? Does that make sense? So you can start here, and from this wave, all biological diversity on planet Earth and the terrestrial systems, as we quoted earlier, vibrates in unison with this wave. That wave is the kingdom. Now, we've never observed this before in biology. This is not what they say in biology, but this is what I'm trying to explain to you today. That is the kingdom. And from that kingdom, from that wave, you can have all types of that. Does that make sense? Now, what do we observe? There are laws governing the combination of matter, from particles to genes to language, linguistics, that limit what can be produced in harmony. What are those laws based on? Acoustics. So all of it comes down to acoustic principles, or acoustic physics. All right, Herbert Spencer Jennings of the Museum of Comparative Zoology at Harvard was the world authority on the behavior of microscopic organisms. He selected for body size in paramecium and found after a few generations, selection had no effect. Even after hundreds of generations, his pure lines remained constrained within fixed limits as unyielding iron. He remained in those limits as unyielding iron. Darwin's gradualism was bounded by internal constraints beyond which selection was useless. This is quoted in Armel in 1996. Now this guy was turn of the 20th century. All right, but basically what it's saying is exactly what you see there in the inverse square law. It's bound by constraints. It can only move forward exactly like we've been showing in the cosmological theory of the universe. It can only move within these constraints. It cannot move in the gradualization that Darwin predicted in his theory. It does not move by millions of infinite changes in the gene system of mutation over time. It moves just like the inverse square law in discrete relationships. Now, there should be no distinct species. How could the existence of a distinct species be justified by a theory, evolution, that proclaims ceaseless change as the most fundamental fact of nature? There would be no distinctness. There would only be this gradual escalation of change over time. But we don't observe this anywhere on planet Earth. What we observe are discrete kinds or kingdoms, or kinds. Evolution requires intermediate forms between species, and paleontology, or excavation of dinosaur bones, does not provide them. This is 1974. That was about 100 years after Darwin's theory was proposed. Evolution is very possibly not, in actual fact, always gradual. But it must be gradual when it is being used to explain the coming into existence of complicated, apparently designed objects like eyes. For if it is not gradual in these cases, evolutionary theory, ceases to have any explanatory power at all. Without gradualness in these cases, we are back to a miracle. This is by Richard Dawkins, the most ardent proponent of evolution today. He's called Darwin's bulldog or something like that. But anyway, he's the most well-known atheist on the planet. But if it doesn't have this gradualization, the evolutionary theory ceases to be an explanatory power at all. So what they're trying to say today, ad hoc of Darwin's original theory, is that it jumps and it goes gradually in big, huge skips. They're trying to combine two different ideas, and it's completely falling apart today. But anyway, what you see is the inverse square law work. You see discrete relationships over time. That point, the luminescent point, is actually the kind, or the kingdom, and it branches out without any impedance at all. This is the inverse square law. In fact, there are no detailed Darwinian accounts for the evolution of any fundamental biochemical or cellular system, only a variety of wishful speculations. That was in 1996. A review of Darwin's Black Box, Biochemical Challenge of Evolution. All right, the laws of acoustics underlying all biogenesis give us the mechanism that tells why these statements are true. Now, at the same time Darwin proposed his theory, Gregor Mendel, not Episcopalian, he was a Catholic. Anyway, he was a monk, okay? I can't remember what specific division of Christianity, but anyway. Gregor Mendel was working on peas. This is where we get all of our experiments for genetics. It's Mendel's foundation. His experiments literally showed that they only follow discrete lines. They can only produce, hopefully got set aside for about 50 years while Darwinian theory flourished. All right? And Darwinian theory is directly opposed to this kind of idea. Now, Darwin's own pigeons. He went home after getting all these ideas from his trip on the Beagle, down to the Galapagos, came back home and started working with pigeons to try to show this gradual change over time. Eventually, his pigeons could only go so far away from the original species or they'd just die off really quickly. So this shows more of the iron rules that there's only a certain amount of space. Alright, this is species. The more you interbreed and mixed breed, you can only go so far away from this line before the species dies. It either becomes not able to reproduce anymore, or its lifespan is so short it's worthless. The farther you get away from this center line. Okay? Now, once you stop the experiment of breeding and mixed breeding and stuff, once you stop the experiment, eventually what will happen is all of those kinds or subspecies will come back to this center line. This is directly opposed to Darwinian theory. And his own experiments show this. Jennings' paramecium showed this, Dobzhansky's fruit flies experiment showed this, and the fossil record itself shows this idea of the distance from the source. Okay?